I'm old enough to remember a time last month where Don Sweeney said that the Bruins were going to be aggressive in the trade market in this offseason. I don't think a lot of us expected them to make a huge splash in free agency. They didn't. They spent more money than they probably should have in free agency. We'll get to that on another day. But the trade market is an interesting piece of this summer because there is still a trade market out there in the NHL. There are a couple of big-time right-shot defensemen, which the Bruins definitely need some depth at. And there are some big-time, young, potentially franchise centers out there on the block. That's what we're going to focus on today. 3 centers that the Bruins could still go out and make a trade for. And I'm going to go one that makes a ton of sense, one that's a bit of a long shot, and one that's somewhere in between. So without any further ado, let's strap in and let's do this thing. First center the Bruins should go after, Mason McTavish of the Anaheim Ducks. It almost makes too much sense for the Bruins to go out and trade for Mason McTavish from Anaheim. Like, he is just right up the alley of everything that Don Sweeney and Cam Neely wants, while also having the things that other Bruins fans and other organizations would love to have in their center. Okay, he's kind of a bruiser. He's 6'1", about 220 pounds. He's 22 years old and still has a ton of offensive skill. Like the ton of offensive skill that gets you picked 3rd overall not all that long ago, 3 years ago. And in his age 22 season, for what is still a bad Anaheim Ducks team, he put up 22 goals, 30 assists, 52 points in 76 games, and had a plus-minus of 0 for a bad team. Like, we all think the Ducks are going to take a step this year, and I believe that as well. And they're promising. But they were still bad last year, and they have been bad ever since Mason McTavish has been there. And he has hit the ground running. Man, he's had 140 points in his first 3 seasons in the NHL for a team that's that bad. And we're talking ages 20 through 22. He put together 140 points in his first 3 seasons in the league. Like, that's a really impressive stat right there. And what's really weird about this scenario is the Ducks kind of just have other young guys who have performed better. Like, they're building around Cutter Gauthier. And I think they probably do want to keep Mason McTavish at the end of the day. It looks like he's going to be their 2C with a couple of veterans on either side, Chris Kreider and Mikael Granlund. But it sounds like Mason McTavish wants out. David Pagnotta had the report this week saying that Mason McTavish does not like his role in Anaheim and kind of the dwindling role that he would have, and that he probably wants out of California. And so that is going to, that's going to have a lot of teams lining up for McTavish, certainly. He doesn't have much control over where he's going, like some of the other guys on this list. He is an RFA, but certainly Toronto has been linked to him, which would be a heck of a deal. Vancouver has been linked hard with him. I don't think I don't think Anaheim is going to want to trade him within the division to somewhere like Vancouver. Ottawa becomes a very interesting one because Mason McTavish's dad is a scout for the Ottawa Senators, and they're a team that could use McTavish's services. And it's in the same division as the Bruins. They've got a better young core. They obviously made the postseason last year. Montreal is looking at him as well. They desperately need a 2C to kind of complete their young core. Montreal struggles with the cap space, as will the Bruins to a lesser extent. But to me, 22 years old, kind of like a power forward, excellent in faceoffs for a team that really, really struggled at the faceoff dot last year. He's been over 50% the last 2 seasons. His career, he's at 49%. So definitely a great guy with some great value at the faceoff dot the Bruins really need. And if he's going to give you 20 plus goals and 60 points, which is something that I think is fair to project for him as he kind of hits his stride and is still a couple of years away from his prime, that could be a huge move for the Bruins. And I think would be an absolute slam dunk. Makes a ton of sense for them to get a guy who is going to hit that physical mark that the Bruins fans and definitely Bruins management wants, but also has the skill that Bruins fans want, that this team needs, and that a lot of other organizations would identify as being a primary need. So Mason McTavish to the Bruins almost makes too much sense. The next one is the bit of the long shot one. Okay. So if you guys stick with me here, we go with the kind of makes all the sense in the world Mason McTavish trade to one that is definitely a bit of a long shot. And that is Jordan Kyrou of the St. Louis Blues. Because everyone's lining up for Jordan Kyrou. Okay. The Blues are also in this kind of weird scenario, like the Ducks, where Jordan Kyrou is an excellent player, but they have a ton of young guys that are kind of ready to step up for them. One of them being Jimmy Snuggerud, who came in at the end of last season. And Jordan Kyrou is the highest paid player on the team. They're willing to move off that contract and build around a young core, and can obviously get something serious in return for Kyrou. He's another guy in the prime of his career, 27 years old, 6'1", about 200 pounds, and he's been a machine over the last couple of seasons. 65-plus points in each of the last 4 years, 70 points in 3 of the last 4 years, breaking it down to 285 points in his last 4 seasons. We talk about the Bruins needing talent and skill and point production more than anything else, despite what Cam Neely and Don Sweeney will tell you through their moves. They don't need to get bigger and tougher. They need to get more skilled. They need to put more pucks in the net. 28th in the league in scoring last year. And here's a guy sitting out there who's coming off a 36-goal season, his third 30-goal season in a row as a center on a 15% shooting percentage last year. That is just the most juicy prospect out there on the trade market. Guys like Jordan Kyrou do not grow on trees, man. This perfectly lines up with the production that the Bruins need at the position the Bruins need. Two-way forward. Not very good at faceoffs for a guy who's playing as a top 6 role for a good playoff team. Again, the Bruins really need to get better at the faceoff dot. It's not the only thing, but he's been pretty bad at them, actually. 40% for his career. That percentage has gone down each of the last 4 seasons. He's been under 36% for each of the last 3. Like, that is really not good for a top-end center. Like, I think Jordan Kyrou is like a 30-goal center. The other the big one, he has a no-trade clause. And that's what makes this a really far-fetched deal for the Bruins. He would have to approve the deal. And let's be honest, guys. Why would he come to the Bruins? Like, why at this point would Jordan Kyrou be like, yeah, I'm in. I'm going to turn the Bruins around. Like, Montreal's after him, right? Like, that's a team with a ton of promise over the next few seasons. They really desperately need Jordan Kyrou. They're already a playoff team. They have a little bit less cap room than the Bruins do, but yeah, it would just make so much more sense for him to want to go play for the Canadiens than to play for the Bruins this year. Like, I don't know that you're going to sell many guys on being like, hey, you're a big part of this turnaround. And especially for a guy who is literally entering into his prime years right now, 27, 28 years old, when you tell him, yeah, I know you're on a playoff team right now and there are other playoff teams after you, but we'll be there in 2 years, it's not much of a sell. Mason McTavish, as a 22-year-old, saying, look, you've already played on some bad teams. We are on our way here. Like, we're going to figure this out in the next 2 seasons. You're going to be a huge part of that. You're going to play with some good veteran guys. Like, maybe that's a bit more of a sell for McTavish, but certainly not for Jordan Kyrou, for a guy who can kind of control his destiny and pick his spot where he wants to go. So that makes it a little bit more far-fetched, but absolutely he fits all the needs that the Bruins want, and pretty much everybody in the league would go for a guy like Jordan Kyrou at the right price. And it is worth noting in here that for these RFAs and for some of these trades on the table, the Bruins do have some capital for the first time in a while. Okay, they've got their first, second, and third round picks for each of the next 3 years. You add on the first round picks from the Carlo trade and the Marchand trade, and they've got 8 picks in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 NHL drafts. Okay, so the Bruins can throw some draft capital out there. They don't have great prospects, right? I think they could move off of someone like Matthew Poitras, who I did a segment on the other day. Check that out on YouTube if you didn't see it, of why I don't want them giving up on him. But what I mean by giving up on him is just stashing him down in Providence and him never seeing the light of day or playing him for half seasons in Boston. If you trade him for someone like Mason McTavish as a part of a deal for Mason McTavish, that's a big difference. Like, that absolutely would make a ton of sense. That's not giving up on him. That's using your assets well, which is something that Don Sweeney doesn't really do very well. So we looked at the one that makes a ton of sense, Mason McTavish. We've looked at one that's a bit of a long shot, Jordan Kyrou. Where's the in-between? It's someone I've talked about before. Number 3 trade option for centers for the Boston Bruins, Marco Rossi of the Minnesota Wild. This is a weird situation. It seemed like Marco Rossi wants out. He wants a long-term deal. He wants a payday. He's 23 years old. He's coming off a 60-point season. He hasn't missed a game in the last 2 years, and he's collected 100 points in that time. So certainly he is a young budding star as the number 2C for the Minnesota Wild, as someone who definitely could be a number 1C in the very near future for a playoff team. And there's been rumors about Rossi for a while now, about his trade value and Minnesota wanting to move off him. And then it kind of just suddenly went away in the last week or so since free agency opened. And Minnesota said they didn't get a significant enough offer for Marco Rossi, which of course really worries me as a Bruins fan and their potential to get him. But looking at the production, it's undeniable, right? Again, 24 goals, 36 assists last year, playing on a second line, playing alongside Matt Boldy for a Minnesota team that went to the playoffs again, and definitely had to, not same positions, apples for apples, but had to make up some production when Kirill Kaprizov was out for a lot of the year. Joel Eriksson Ek was out for a significant amount of time. So a lot of production expectations was shouldered by Marco Rossi in this year and kept Minnesota afloat and kept them going to the playoffs. But when I hear they didn't get a good offer for him, that makes me think Don Sweeney probably just threw out a 3rd round pick and Johnny Beecher and tried to get away with it. What I find really interesting about Rossi is it feels like a lot of Bruins fans are on the same page that they would love a guy like Marco Rossi, and I absolutely would too. He's 5'9". He's 182. He's the same size as James Higgins, which has divided Bruins fans into saying he's too small. But in the case of Marco Rossi, it's just fine. He's not that much older. He's 23, which is great. And again, durability, has played every game over the last 2 seasons. So maybe, shove the he's too small thing right up where the sun don't shine. The Bruins could absolutely use Marco Rossi. It kind of goes without saying. There have been several teams interested in the Wild center. But when you look at each of these 3 guys, Rossi, Kyrou, McTavish, all of them would be at least your second line center right now. And I honestly believe each of those 3 guys could slot in as your number 1 center tomorrow. Certainly in the case of Rossi and Kyrou. And I think you would do that. You could do that with Mason McTavish as well. Lest we forget, their top line center last year was not the one they were paying $7.75 million in Elias Lindholm. Wasn't him. The Bruins' top line center last year was Pavel Zacha, a middle 6 winger that you put on the first line at center because he plays well with David Pastrnak. And I'm not poo-pooing that idea. You do need somebody that plays well with David Pastrnak, but the Bruins also really need a center, a first-line center. James Higgins might be that, but he might be that in 3 to 4 years. I'm talking he could be in the NHL, not this next season, but the season after. But he ain't going to be a number 1 or 2 center on this team for another 3 or 4 years. By bringing in someone like McTavish, or dare I say Jordan Kyrou, but probably more likely Mason McTavish, you've accelerated that. Then in 2 years, you've got a young core where you've got 2 top 10 NHL draft picks at center for you, a 24, 25-year-old Mason McTavish and a 21-year-old James Higgins. And all of a sudden, the future is looking very, very bright. And by then, the Bruins should be in a playoff picture. David Pastrnak will still be in his prime. Charlie McAvoy will still be in his prime. Hopefully, you've got goaltending figured out by then. And all of a sudden, things are looking way, way up. maybe even better than the way Montreal looks right now, which is scary how good they look right now, set up for the future. The Bruins could accelerate that rebuild, retool by just getting crafty in the trade market here. They've got draft capital to throw around. I'm not saying throw all of it out. We're in a position where we haven't been for a long time as Bruins fans, where they've actually got some premium draft capital. They've got some prospects in the system. You certainly need some more. So you can't just get rid of all of it. But like if you're dumping a couple of premium picks for Mason McTavish, that's like betting on a sure thing. Like he's already produced in the NHL and he's 22 years old. Like that's like getting a top 10 draft pick. The only thing I don't want the Bruins to move off of, the only pick I'm like, no, please don't do it, is their own first round pick next year. Unless you're bringing in an absolute superstar, which isn't going to happen. The Bruins would be insane to draft the Bruins would be insane to trade their own number one pick for next year. That would be a fireable offense for Don Sweeney if you trade their own number one pick for next year for anything less than an absolute superstar. Because there are a lot of teams that are going to be on this Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, man. And what happened with the Islanders this past year, they were supposed to be picking 10th? And they ended up picking number 1. If you have the chance to get that kind of lucky for next year for Gavin McKenna, you do not mess with that. And the Bruins might not need to be lucky. They're going to be pretty friggin' bad. So anything less than a superstar, all-star kind of player, you do not trade your own number one pick for next year. Trade Toronto's. Trade your number one pick the year after that. Trade that Florida pick that you got for the Marchand trades. Probably not going to be very premium. But trade each of those other ones, just not your own first-round pick next year. That said, I think the Bruins can still be pretty active in the trade market, and there's still some pretty good names out there. McTavish, Kyrou, Marco Rossi. Let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments section below. Will Don Sweeney actually pull the trigger? Probably not. He's just blowing hot smoke up your ass once again. Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see the Bruins get active in trades, you can find us live on YouTube every weekday, high noon Eastern time, and then wherever you get your podcasts as well. Check out the other videos on the channel, talking Bruins and a lot of hockey here on the channel. I'm your host, Cam Stewart. Zach Burke keeps us on the air 5 days a week.